So I want to start the conversation by kind of bridging these areas of religion, media, corporate inclusion. And so I have a question for all of you. In your work, how have you seen news coverage of religion influence workplace settings, whether that's through policy, culture, or leadership decisions? I don't know who would like to start, but I can do.
Okay. Well, I have to start by saying that, our work at Bridging Cultures Group is always dictated by current events, unfortunately, and what is actually happening and how we need to show up in the world to provide the support that's needed. And so, it's been in multiple ways. So I'll just give you some historical context. Years ago, back to, and Mark probably remembers all of this when we did the Muslim holidays. That actually came about when New York State decided to actually have one of the New York State standardized tests land on Eid. And the community was up in arms. Kids had to choose between school and holiday. And that fueled a movement to actually create a robust coalition that worked for a good 10 years to get the Muslim holiday passed in New York City. Have we gotten it passed in New York State? No. But what New York State is doing is now they put together an interfaith advisory council that makes sure that they never actually schedule any holidays on the specific Muslim holidays, or for that matter, other holidays, as diverse as New York is. Another time that we saw was during the pandemic. There was a huge discrepancy of halal food. And since then, now the New York City contracting agencies are providing halal food. We also saw this in the New York City public school system after a study was done where children were being malnourished because they didn't have many options to eat. And one of those reasons was because there wasn't halal food on the menu. So a pilot, we worked on a pilot of $1 million with the city council. The pilot was actually done in 10 schools. It was extremely successful. But the point that I want to bring when bringing this particular item, the school system had great anxiety to do it. And they're like, we don't know what they're going to say. This is public school. How are we going to do this? This is a violation of church and state. And we're like, why does food have to be political? Just do the right thing. All it means is that you are getting halal products. You are not getting an imam who's coming to bless the food in every cafeteria. It's just getting, properly slaughtered halal meat into the school system to be able to serve it to students. And so, the 10 schools happened, and now it's in over 100 schools. But the policy work that we did, and I'm most proud of, is that now any parent, even if it's just one child in a school across the 5 boroughs, goes in and tells the principal that my child only eats halal, they have to actually bring halal food into the school system. So I'll stop there and give my colleagues opportunity to respond as well.
Thank you.
Can you just repeat the question again?
Of course. Of course. The question is, how have you seen news coverage of religion influence workplace settings, whether that's through workplace policy, leadership strategies?
I can speak from the perspective of what it's like as a reporter trying to work with a communications department, which I think probably reflects the way in which companies interpret the reporting that has come out. And I'm not on a standard religion beat, so I don't have like a sense exactly of kind of, what company X thinks about the New York Times' coverage. But it is really interesting to think about what companies are kind of friendlier to a reporter, like want to let a reporter in, give a reporter access, versus companies that seem very skeptical and are much less willing to make sources available, or you can just kind of tell that they want to shut it down, like they don't want to be. And so it's really interesting to me. Like, I think it must be related in some ways to like how these companies maybe have been covered in the past when it comes to reporting on employees, bringing your whole self to work, issues of belonging, that perhaps if companies feel like they've been burned by reporters or by stories, maybe they're less willing. Personally, like, I think that, at least for me, it's always a balance, right? Because my job is not to project like the great thing that the company is doing. I want to talk to people and I want to hear what the employees think and why they think that. And I'm really just kind of coming at it with that open mind. And I think most reporters really are. And so it just always, like, to be working with a communications department that like is going to be open-minded in the way that like I am trying to be open-minded. I think that like you're gonna get it's good to build that relationship with the reporter, because if you're really just kind of like closed up when someone reaches out to you, then the reporter is thinking like, well, why? what are they hiding? Like, why are they, not giving me access to their employees? Do they not trust their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember you and I talked about that briefly as well. And it was eye-opening for me because it's not always something that you consider in terms of your relationship. And you talked about how your first point of contact is typically like the communications team, and then they put you in touch with the DEI contact. And I also remember, I want to ask you, I'm curious, what would be the experience or the response that you want to see when you do get in touch with communications teams and companies and corporations where you want to talk about their policies? And
yeah, I mean, I always want to hear from individuals. Like, I personally, so I'm not covering like policies. I'm covering the way in which policies impact employees, or the way in which employees are trying to drive policy change within their company. And so, I understand like there are levels of gatekeeping that are necessary, right? Like, that is part of this process. So it makes complete sense to me that I would get on with a communications person. Maybe they would bring their DEI lead onto the call with them, and we'd have an introductory conversation where they would ask me what I'm looking for. I would explain, and then I'd ask them questions about kind of like, talk to me about what you're doing. And here are the types of people I might want to talk to. Like, I want to talk to someone who leads the, like, let's say I want to understand, do you have an if you have an ERG for religion, like for various religions, like I want to talk to the person who runs the interfaith one. I want to talk to someone like, what's the newest one, right? Like, I remember, I think it was maybe Salesforce. Like, I spent a lot of time talking with the one of the women who started the Sikh ERG there, because it was very new. And I was thinking to myself, like, probably this is not something that the majority of people are aware of. Like, so I want to bring that voice out, right? And in that particular instance, like, they were very open. Like, they connected me to a bunch of people. They did not have their comms leads on the call. They really trusted their employees. And I really appreciated that, because I was able to get what seemed like a really honest response. And I try to be like responsible as a reporter and like, you know, nothing is a gotcha thing, right? Like, I just want to know how people feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like that goes back to another point that was made in a conversation before this about trust and having trust be a part of that relationship. So thank you for bringing that up. I want to pivot, Deborah, to talk a little bit about how religious diversity is represented in the media. And I think a lot of us here also have had to navigate overwhelmingly negative headlines or narratives that perpetuate religion in a lens and through a lens of conflict. And a number that always comes up for me here, actually through FAMI, which I believe you and Dr. Debbie are both on the board of in the coalition, is that 63% of faith-related media content can be classified as provocative and depict faith and faith institutions in a negative light. And so I wanted to talk to you about how your mission and values at RNS inform your approach to covering religion, and how does Religion News Service challenge these narratives of conflict when they do show up?
Oh, that's a big question. Try not to bore you with all of my media theory. So what I would say is there's a lot to unpack, but the first thing to say is that a lot of times coverage of religion is, and I particularly mean with conflict, is sort of politics coverage masquerading as religion coverage. That's really a lot of what happens. And I've been at this for many years, several decades, and you sort of see it come up and down in cycles. The last one that I remember really well was after 9/11, and we're obviously seeing it again now. And a lot of that coverage is there. There is a lot of politics brought up in religion. And I think I, having again been at this for a long time, would say more so than any time in my career has that been true. So sometimes it's unfair the way that coverage is packaged, but the impulse to cover religion as with the political undertone or sometimes overtones it's a thing. It's real. Religion is a social force. It's a cultural force, and a lot of it is politically driven these days. Plus, religion is religion, but we at RNS also look at religion. And to be fair, there are reporters who do this well, including the Times' reporters. They're very, very good. And there are others. We know that religion is a force. It's, you can step back and say, oh, that's religion, but that's not the same as faith or meaning or something that's profound or inspirational. And so what we try to do at RNS is cover the controversy, we cover the politics, because those are important social forces that must be covered. We also cover religion as meaning, inspiration, faith. And so it's sort of like what we're doing is widening a lens and not always covering it as sort of like faith or politics underneath. And a couple of examples just recently is our immigration coverage, which is inherently political these days. It didn't used to be. But now, obviously, there's a political aspect of it. But what we're also doing is covering the clergy and the faith groups, the imams, the rabbis, the pastors who are in solidarity with migrants and immigrants, who are using their community centers and their sanctuaries as places to feed and house and care for, to work with them legally. And they're protesting, as we all know, and they're also coming along with them to their legal appointments. And that's people we're talking there about people whose faith is motivating them. And then one final thing, and I'll stop, is that the other thing to remember about this in the media environment, this has always been true. It's been true my whole career, but it's much worse now because of the struggle of the media industry and the businessmen. There have always been not enough religion reporters, and it's now worse than it's ever been. So I would say there's probably only a few dozen people, both reporters, editors, and producers covering religion nationally around the country. And RNS is by far the largest of that group. We have, I think, 10 or 11 reporters and, 4 editors. It's like we're a small organization, but we're like the behemoth in the entire group of religion reporters. So what you need to also understand is that a lot of the reporters who then get assigned some of these stories, they don't really know what they're doing. And they're trying, and I do have to speak up for my fellow journalists. It's a very difficult beat. It's a minefield. It's complicated. And so a lot of times they will default to politics because maybe that's what their editors told them to do. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Thank you. I was nodding because I was also thinking about you, Jennifer, because I'm sure that you have also had that experience as a journalist yourself and a reporter.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very strange, this is what it means to be like if you're not a staff reporter or you are not specifically on a religion beat, and it's really for anything, is like you are giving yourself a primer. You've got, a couple of months if you're lucky. I mean, I'm not doing breaking news, so luckily, I do have some time, but I am basically learning everything I possibly can about a story that I'm working on. And I often am coming to it with some context, but not necessarily a lot of context. I mean, I knew nothing about the Sikh religion, for example, before I started reporting this particular story for the Times. And there was a learning curve, and I had to spend, what you don't know, and you educate yourself, right? And that's part of the reporting. I do think it's interesting, like what you were saying before about how that statistic about conflict and how faith reporting is so often, there's so often conflict. And I mean, just in terms of, if I'm pitching a story, and it doesn't matter what the story is about, it could be about religion, it could be about anything, there has to be some kind of conflict at the center of it. In order for that story to be picked up by the publication, something's got to be new, and there's got to be some tension at the heart of it. And it's not that they're only going to publish a story where there's a fight in the middle of it. It's more subtle and nuanced than that. But I'm never going to be able to sell if I want to write a story. So this particular story about faith ERGs and how more employees are pushing to start these types of ERGs, right? Traditionally focused on race, gender, maybe sexual orientation, but not necessarily faith, right? And so this was something that was starting to really ramp up inside of companies. And so that's a new thing. But I know that my editor, the first thing they're going to ask me is, well, what's the conflict? What's the tension? And so it's my job as the reporter and that's not why I'm writing the story. I'm not writing the story because I want to be everybody's fighting with each other. That's not, but I know that I have to ask those questions. I have to look at, and there probably are tensions because it's human beings with different opinions and different, contexts trying to get along. So that's gonna be some of it. But that's always a balance for the journalist, the editor, and what is going to be the newsy thing that is going to get eyeballs.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of want to, before I turn to you, Dr. Almontaser, I'm going to ask a follow-up as well, because I think there are a lot of points there that RNS can also speak to. And I know you sent a few articles as well. I think there's you're introducing Love Thy Neighbor as a series. Is that right? Could you speak about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, this is also a little bit of it's a little different from for-profit media in that sense. We are mainstream media, but we also have a higher mission. So, and I don't mean that in the religious sense. But yeah, we are starting something called Love Thy Neighbor. It will be a year-long series that looks at ways that people of faith, or for that matter, not faith, but people of ethics, are trying to literally help their neighbor. And we're doing it because we're in this really difficult atmosphere. And I don't think we're alone in, there are many other news organizations that are trying to leaven things a bit. And, but I don't think as many, I don't think news organizations may look at it necessarily from the faith lens, right? So that's the idea, is how are faith organizations not necessarily fighting over the Bible or politics or whatever, but how are they helping people around them?
And I'd want to bring it back into the workplace, and we're talking about this area of conflict. Dr. Debbie, Bridging Cultures does a lot of consulting work in this space, and you work directly with corporations. You also work in the education setting. How have you seen conflict kind of bleed into these places, whether it's through the media, through religious coverage, in the news? And how do you deal with that when it does come up in the workplace?
Thank you. That's a really great question. And, you know, one of the times that we really got into deep waters was actually in the last 2 years after the Israel-Palestine crisis that took place. And the New York City public school system called me end of November. The chancellor called me and said, "We need your help." And I'm saying to myself, what can I possibly do for you?
A lot.
And he basically, and that was what I said in my head, because I was like, oh my God. I said, okay, talk to me. He said, I have kids walking out. Teachers are terrified to say anything about this. They're afraid they're going to offend somebody. They're afraid they're going to say something wrong. We have kids that are rioting in school. There are anti-Semitic incidents that are happening. There are Islamophobic incidents happening. And I've been told by a number of people to call you because you can help us. So I went and I met with him, and I gave him an analysis of what's happening. I said, one, students don't have a place to process what they are hearing and what they are seeing. Their minds have been infiltrated by social media feeds, the algorithms that keep showing the same thing over and over. Some of them have dinner with their families at the table. We don't know what all those conversations are. And then what they're talking to their friends in the schoolyard, in the cafeteria. And then we have no one to help them process what they're hearing, what they're seeing, to really develop a better understanding of what is actually happening. And then on the other hand, we have teachers who are terrified to touch this because they don't have the skill set to actually facilitate difficult conversations. And so there needs to be a training on how to facilitate difficult conversations. But before we do that, they also have to understand what Islamophobia is and what anti-Semitism is. And the best way to do that is by understanding what each of those communities have to put up with when it comes to tropes, anti-Semitic tropes, Islamophobic tropes, and how they manifest and how they come up in conversations. And then how do you actually use a moment when a trope is used in a dialogue or a conversation to actually use it as a teachable moment versus a punitive moment where a child is penalized and used as an opportunity to actually unpack it and help them understand and help their peers understand that what was just said is anti-Semitic or Islamophobic. And that's how we learn. And that's how we help make sure that others within that dialogue know and understand it to be able to be the ambassadors when they hear it in other places to address it. And so we actually started with a couple of pilot schools that we did, off the record in schools that were like, come start with us. We trained some of their staff. The staff then actually did trainings with other staff members. And what we actually recommended was for them to actually have two facilitators, one who is Jewish and one who is either of Arab, Palestinian, or Muslim background, in order for us to model how we can actually be the models for our students to have those types of conversations. And then after the success of that, the New York City school system actually provided us the opportunity to do 24 schools where we actually provided the training. And everyone who came to the training, there were people who were skeptical and who were like, we're coming to get you because we know that this is going to be a one-sided narrative. And we disarmed them once they heard from both of our facilitators who were facilitating what their job and role was and why they're there. And that our objective was actually to build empathy. We weren't there to solve what is happening overseas. We were there to humanize each other and build empathy. And most importantly, help the young people as well as the educators understand that fear is on both sides of that coin. The Jewish community was in fear. The Arab Muslim community was in fear. And we saw this spike in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. We saw the number of fatalities that Palestinians experienced in the aftermath of October 7th. So really helping them understand that this work is important because we want to make sure that all of our neighbors, whether they're Arab, Palestinian, Jewish, Muslim, all feel safe, and that we should all be working to make sure that we have a space that we can coexist. And if we can't do it in our classrooms, then what are we doing to teach the next generation of leaders to be the ambassadors and leaders for our communities?
Absolutely. I'm also thinking so much about our education program because I'm hearing so many similarities there. Thomas, is it opening up for Q&A, or may I close with one more question? We'll do like a lightning round. I'd love to ask, what responsibilities do leaders have when it comes to monitoring religion in the news and better managing its effects within the workplace? I can pass it over to Dr. Debbie if you have just a quick.
Absolutely. So, I monitor the news a lot because it, again, as I mentioned earlier, it informs a lot of the work that we do. And so I need to be aware of what's happening so we can respond. So, just a couple of weeks ago, we were in Somos, Puerto Rico. Our mayor-elect actually was there. He went to a service day. He went to pray at a mosque in Puerto Rico. And then the headlines the next day came out. And everybody was like, finally, there's positive good news about him, because majority of the news has been really Islamophobic, negative. And so interestingly enough, just last week, Equality Lab just released a 90-page report that showed there were over 46 million pieces written about him in a negative light. Wow. And that for me was just astonishing, 46 million. So that included news and social media. And I was like, okay, I have a lot of work to do this year. And interestingly enough, also, a couple of weeks ago, a school contacted us and they're like, we need to prepare our young people to talk about this moment. And I was like, well, what moment are you talking about? Because there's so many moments. And they're like, the election. Because there are going to be people who are happy. There are people that are going to be upset. There are people that are going to be angry. And I was like, you guys are really smart. Yes, let's do this.
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, I'm not quite sure how to answer this question because I'm really a solo operator.
I love the solo operator lens as well.
I mean, I don't know. I'm constantly having this argument with my husband because he doesn't like, he stopped reading the newspaper basically. Like he has put the Times app like at the like last page of his phone. And then I am like constantly toggling between the Times and the Washington Post and a bunch of other publications, in part because I just feel a responsibility to know what is happening, almost as just like in this kind of like I'm witnessing it type of way, because I care so much about this country and like my identity like as an American like is very strong, which is very much actually a product of the reporting that I did in the Middle East, interestingly enough. But and so I feel like it's really important to like continue to just see what is happening. It's really hard. It's like emotionally really, really hard to be that witness. And like anyone who's doing this type of work, like we are doing that just by default. I don't know. I don't have like a great.
No, that's amazing. Thank you for putting a voice to that as well, because that has been coming up in so many conversations I've had lately is how do you stay informed and also how do you maintain any sense of peace. But I also think that that's where organizations like Religion News Service tie into it, and that narrative. So I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions for our panelists today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this panel. It was really interesting for me. I've been struggling with how to make sure I'm reading and listening to outside mainstream media, because I feel like and I'm wondering what you're seeing. I feel like there's a lot of distrust of the mainstream media, frankly, like even the New York Times, who, has been this beacon of progressive stuff. And there are a lot of progressive people who are like, not so much right now. And so places like Zeteo and other, forms of media. And I'm just wondering how you see media shifting these days because of social media, YouTube, et cetera. There are all these more like alternative media streams that are able to report differently. So I'd love to hear what you're seeing, if that's affecting your work, both inside organizations and as journalists.
We're playing microphone tag.
Yeah, I can answer that. I'll try to talk about it from the point of view of the publisher role, but also the me role. We're in a weird situation because we are mainstream media, and at the same time we cover this niche that gives us a little bit of a little bit more credibility with more conservative people. And so we try to take advantage of that from the good point of view. We try to continue to be an honest broker. But I will tell you, it has gotten much, much harder. And I think about this probably every day, is like literally like how to position our brand, and how to maintain the trust that we have. It's a small news organization. It's known among, people who know of us, and has this we have cultivated this genuine trust between an audience and the work that we do. But, starting let's be honest, within the last decade, we used to be able to easily have commentary and sources across the religious spectrum. And I'm talking specifically here about, evangelical Christianity. And over the years, it's gotten harder and harder to the point that our editor has said, he would, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, he would still sometimes get, a commentary or op-ed offered to us from a conservative person. And he would have to say, I'm sorry, I can't publish this because we have to publish facts. And now occasionally we are still able to do that, but the very conservative right is just. Did I turn it off? Oh. The very. Might have died.
It might have died.
So the very conservative right no longer trust us. We know that. I mean, they don't trust the New York Times, or and they've been told not to trust. And so the best we can do is just keep trying. It's really, really difficult.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that, actually?
Yeah.
So wait, I'm curious though, like, have you changed what you guys are, so you were always rejecting op-eds that were not
Actually, I did think of something. Yeah. This is fun. But I will say we do still have a very strong readership and sources and commentary coming to us from what I would call the non-MAGA evangelical crowd. So when you may have heard of this person named Beth Moore, who is a famous Bible author and scholar, when she was ready to quit the Southern Baptist Convention because it had, embraced MAGA, she came to us because she knew that we would be the honest broker. And that story the next day ran on the front page of the New York Times. And when we did a story on there's a very famous mega church called Willow Creek outside of Chicago that's this year celebrated its 50th anniversary, and it had gone through all of these travails with sexual abuse and all kinds of things. And so when we did that story, we of course reported that, but we also reported on how it had tried to come to its anniversary with accountability and how to move forward. And the point is, people were willing to talk to us because they saw us as honest brokers. It's the problem is you're suggesting is that it's, what do they call it? The Overton window has moved. So we can't report on, we have to report facts.
Thank you. And are
I'll be
we
really quick.
close on time? If you could keep it to
Yeah.
1 minute, that would be
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you.
absolutely. One of the very things that I do is whenever I hear anything pertaining specifically to the communities that we focus on, Arab Muslims and South Asians, I immediately identify people that live in that city, state, whatever, leaders, and I simply pick up the phone and say, do you have any idea what's going on? And I usually get a complete, if not very drastically different side of a story. And this is something that we see here in New York City with how the New York Post presents materials on teachers, on community members, and then you pick up the phone and you call and it's completely different. So I think it's really important to actually speak to people on the ground. And sadly, we've lost that opportunity to have trust between credible journalists and community members to really get the truth out and a story in its authenticity.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry to cut the conversation short, but you can all find our great panelists as well and keep the conversation going. So thank you, Deborah, Dr. Debbie, and Jennifer, for everything today. Thank you.